Hello, hello.
Hello.
Let's see. Okay, you guys can see me now. Hey, let me get this
Hey
agenda
friends,
up.
how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Hanging in there. Just got a
Hey.
very spirited TAC meeting. Very spirited.
I have a stand-up every single week that happens. And it's not like a quick 5-10 minute stand-up. It's a large team, so it takes a while. And I can never join now. So it'd be interesting to hear offline. That way.
Sometimes these meetings they go hard in the paint. Sometimes.
Okay,
It's
let me
always
get
interesting to see who joins the meeting. Like I get a kick out of like depending upon what the meeting is at certain times, you'll get like individuals you never see ever. Like they join the It's always exciting. Exciting for me
okay.
anyway.
Let's see. Let's go ahead and get started. I put the link to the doc in the chat, and then I'm gonna share my Zoom, not Zoom, sorry, my Google Doc. If I can share. Where is it? Chrome. There it is. Okay, you should be able to see this, right? Yes. Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. So please feel free to sign in. If you don't have the link, I can repost it, or someone can repost it again. And I don't know if some of these folks are, well, I know Mike is on, right? But I know Isaac had a topic and Claudia had a topic that they wanted to do last time, and we ran out of time. So I'm looking at the list of participants because I can't quite see. Yeah, so they're not on. So that's fine. Okay, so good news. I did submit that panel discussion to OpenSSF. They required a lot more fields than than the regular OSSNA submission. So I stole some stuff that Isaac wrote in the supply chain integrity working group mission and vision, because I talked about, well, why should the community care? Things like that. I'm like, I am not going to come up with my own thing here. So I just copied and pasted some of the things and just kind of tried to make it, sound like, yes, we need this. The audience needs this. So I'm hoping that it'll get selected. But we'll see in terms of the panel. And I keep forgetting newcomers. Are there any newcomers on the call? Okay. Okay, good. So that was one thing. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, it took me a second. Benjamin Schmidt. So,
Hey, Ben.
so
Do you go by Benjamin or Ben?
either, but usually Ben, shorter.
Okay. So what brings you in today?
Actually, came just an interest in supply chain security and just to see looking for some point where I might be able to chip in and learn some more about it.
Yeah. Well, welcome. This I don't know, it's like a 4th or 5th meeting as the OpenSSF SCI positioning SIG. So we've gotten a lot more participation from folks. I don't know if it's because the name change or if it's because of time change, because both happened at the same time. So, but yeah, we just try to evangelize, educate, anything and everything under the supply chain integrity. So welcome any and all help you or your colleagues might be able to provide. So let's see. Mike, did you want to go with your topic up here that you put?
Oh, sorry. That was, I inadvertently put that in there.
Okay,
Sorry. That was
No.
actually for the other SCI group. I forgot to delete it out of this one.
got it. No worries. But for folks on the call, we do need help with Fresca.
Oh.
So if you have development experience or know some developers that can help with the tooling, Fresca could use some new developers.
Oh, so actually one thing so one thing that I'm doing is I'm writing up for tomorrow. I should have a draft for the Fresca meeting, which the Fresca meeting's at 10 a.m. Eastern time, happens every other week on Wednesdays. And so I'm actually writing up right now, like a little bit of a intro, like a what is Fresca, what are the high level goals, how does it plan to achieve those goals, what is Fresca today, what does Fresca plan to do tomorrow, and as well as some sort of practical, like, hey, here are some big here are some big items that we're currently working on, so folks who are interested in there. So for example, right, we're working on making Fresca a little bit more deployable, more easily deployable. So that's one big one. And then the second big one being we're looking to define an easy way for users to interact with Fresca, since Fresca right now is a bunch of tools like like Tecton chains, Kyverno, and a bunch of other things. Like, how can we make sure that when we deploy, when we run a build that is supposed to go through policy, supposed to go through Tecton, supposed to go through stuff like Spiffy Spire, that we're doing it all the right way. So I'm writing up a big write-up on that should be ready as a draft tomorrow in the Fresca meeting, and then assume probably in the next week or two, that will go out to the broader community as like a call to action there. Because I know a lot of folks, it's funny because I keep seeing Fresca show up in a lot of presentations, a lot of people keep bringing it up, but as far as actually getting contributors and maintainers to help out, it's been a bit of a struggle.
Okay, and I'm guessing you can put the link here for that draft so that people can review once it's ready.
Sure. Actually, you know what? Let me take what I have thus far and just copy, because right now I'm just doing it via Markdown. But I will copy paste the text at least into a document right now, and then I'll post it in there.
Okay, awesome. And then let's see, anything else with regards to Fresca? No. I'm trying to go down the list of action items from last time. We did kick off the OpenSSF. Comms plan, so that's in the works. Trying to think, the blogs is one thing. The roadmap we haven't kicked off yet. In terms of people kind of revamping that. I'm trying to look at okay, so blogs, that's going to be important for the 1.0 release. But before we get to the blogs, oh, Isaac, you removed it. No, you didn't. You're right. It's right there. Do you want to go over this, Isaac?
Yeah, I can do. I mean, it was something that has come up in discussion once or twice with folks. I think Brian Bellendorf has raised it. Our technical writer here at Google commented as well, and it was just this idea that stuff we put in blogs, just having an eye to what stuff should belong in core documentation rather than blogs. And I'm not sure that we have any kind of guiding principles or kind of things for folks to think about as they're writing blogs, but I think it would be worthwhile as having some opinion and maybe some guidelines for people as they're writing blog posts to think, oh, am I blogging about something that ought to be in the core documentation reference, or is this truly, news/time sensitive and belongs in blogs on that basis? So I honestly don't know what the guidelines are or would be, but I think that in order to make sure we end up with a great set of documentation, we don't have documentation masquerading as blog posts, I think we should consider this. And that's about all I've got. And so if anyone's got an idea, any ideas we could discuss now, if anyone thinks that it would be worthwhile having some guidelines, I don't mind drafting some for comment. But at this stage, I just wanted to get a sense of like, do folks agree that this feels worthwhile to do for this group? Is this group the right forum? And what would be the right way of kicking it off?
Yeah, I've seen this actually also be a problem the other way because of some of the OpenSSF governance on what is allowed in a blog, or sorry, rather around like how blogs get published. For example, all blogs are supposed to go to the TAC for approval. Some folks have said, great, like, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to upload something that is just my thoughts because, hey, this is just my thoughts on a topic regarding something in OpenSSF, you know, and something in the project. I'm just going to throw that up as documentation in the
oh, interesting.
Yeah,
You kind of sidestep the centralized TAC review of blogs by just going, oh, well, it's project docs in that case.
yeah, and to be clear, I think that there's one of the things I know that has been brought up multiple times with the TAC is we really need to separate out what is an OpenSSF official blog, as in like this is something that's on the core, you know, OpenSSF blog, and what is like, hey, these are thoughts of the project maintainers or the community. And this obviously came up a bunch of times with Salsa, but one of the things that kind of came out of that also was like, hey, look, we don't want to end up in a situation where either of those two things happen, right? We don't want to end up in a situation where folks try to skirt the rules by just sort of saying this is part of a project or whatever, but then also at the same time, like the whole point of these projects is that there's supposed to be some independent governance of those projects where they can, you know, they don't have to necessarily approve every single PR, right, through the TAC or something like that, because that's obviously not the intention either. But I think that there's, just to be clear, I think the governance rules, from what my at least interpretation is, that stuff that goes on the OpenSSF blog, that has to go through TAC review. But if you have a project and you have, you know, some messaging that's not considered part of some of those core things that's in OpenSSF governance, like release, that means you have to go through TAC and yada yada. There's a bunch of stuff in the community spec and whatever. I think that needs to go through TAC, but like general, like, hey, you know, as an example, could I post something about what is Fresca? Would I need TAC approval to talk through what Fresca is on outside of the OpenSSF blog? I think that sort of thing.
That makes sense. Jay, I see you got your hand up too.
Yep, and I also got a hand up for Melba afterwards. So when I'm done, Melba can go after.
Thank you.
Melba. So as a caveat to what you both are saying, right? Isaac, I absolutely do believe that we should provide some type of guidelines on what's blog worthy versus core documentation. As a caveat to what Mike just said, we've got to be one way or the other. We can't be both. Like so if when we come up with these guidelines, we have to also say, for what we do, we are doing it this way. If we're going to write a blog, it's going to go before the TAC, and they're going to weigh in, and then we're going to release. What we can't do is say, we're going to have these guidelines with a caveat that a maintainer can go off somewhere else and write a blog or something else. And because it may not necessarily be OpenSSF centric, they can go ahead and release that blog. We need to be able to have some type of visibility. If the intent of our SIG is to have that kind of role in the process, we need to maintain at a SIG level visibility of what kind of blogs get created where and how those blogs go out. And if it's to write this kind of guidance, which I absolutely 100% agree with, I think that guidance needs to be ironclad in one way, and there can't be any, if there's so many exceptions to the policy's wrong, right? If you have exceptions to the policy, you got to change the policy, right? And it doesn't work if there's always an exception. Why have a policy at all? So I agree with creating something like that, but I just want to make sure we put the right guardrails in place so that it can be followed and enforced as intended. So I as a caveat to what Mike is saying, and Isaac, I'm right here with you. Let's go ahead and do it if we're going to do it. Just make sure that we're that we're tighten it on what our scope and objective is behind doing it. And Melba, the hands up for you.
Yes, thank you, Jay. When for folks on the call, when you're sharing, you can't raise your hand in Zoom for some reason. So I have to ask people to raise their hands for me. So somebody, I don't remember who it was that said it. It could have been Mike. That project blogs currently could, potentially blog on their own project web page or something, but if it's a release, it's supposed to go through OpenSSF. So that makes me wonder about all the also 1.0 comms and the blogs that we're planning. Do those blogs now need to go in front of the TAC before we push to salsa.dev? So I'm concerned, confused, all right, because it makes sense for little things, but now that somebody mentioned the release aspect, I'm like, oh, do we have to go to the TAC for all of these blogs that we're trying to write? So go ahead, Isaac. I know you had your hand up after me.
So a couple of things. So I think that we're talking about there's two separate things here. So I think thing number one is a set of guidelines for when you're thinking about publishing information about S2C2F or Salsa. Here's how to think about whether it belongs in docs or whether it belongs in a blog. I think that guideline would be useful for content creators. And so that if I write, oh, I'd love to write a blog post on how to use Salsa with such and such a build system, I should know whether actually that shouldn't be a blog post. Actually, that should be in the core documentation set. And so some guidelines for people creating content as how to think about and reason about the question, is this a blog post or is this documentation? And so I think that set of guidelines was where I began this thinking. I think what Jay is raising is a separate point, which is governance around who is authorized to speak in the voice of the project and how does that authorization and review occur, which is a slightly different question, which is kind of like almost like once we have an opinion that we want to blog about, how does that get reviewed and which properties are subject to which governance? Like is the salsa.dev blog, does it have the same governance as the OpenSSF blog? I ask that, not even knowing the answer. I honestly don't know. Until now, I think we've approached the salsa.dev blog as it's a PR, anyone can do it, anyone can review it, and then it gets published. But I think, I guess what I'm saying is I think that there's two parts to this. Part one is a guideline around which types of content belong where. And then secondly, for blog posts specifically, how does review occur and so on. And I think, I agree with Jay that we want to create a set of rules that can't be circumvented and so on. We're simply not going to get that right first time. And so, I would say, yes, that's the right destination, but we can get there in multiple steps. Like we can start off by saying, here are some guidelines. Okay, these guidelines are now recommendations. These now recommendations are now rules. These rules are now enforced by this governance process or whatever it may be. And so I think that there's a phased approach to how we get there, but it does seem like we're talking about two separate things now.
So yeah. So to just say so, as somebody who's been there since day one with the first Salsa meeting and kind of gone on from there, this was something that we had already gone through. So I do think that we probably just need to go to the TAC and just make sure that we have everything sort of correct, because there was actually a whole bunch of discussions on stuff like, and in fact, we came to some, I don't know the exact details, but we did come to some sort of agreement, I believe, with the TAC around certain things like, is this, when we put something out on Salsa, is this coming from a community member and it is their opinion and thoughts versus this is coming as an official statement from Salsa? And if it's an official statement from Salsa, then yes, that needs to go through, more stringent governance than necessarily just like, hey, recognize that this is, a guest blog from a community member. And then, in addition to that, some additional things there, right, where like certain things, like given that we're still governed under the community spec, like certain sorts of announcements that are larger announcements like, hey, a 1.0 announcement that needs to go through different, governance, and we're already bound by some of that. The exact details are where I think there's a lot of confusion, and I think it really would be nice to just kind of hash it out with whomever. I don't know if that's legal, I don't know if that's TAC, but just kind of get that hashed out to then find out what is underneath our purview to institute, additional governance as we see fit, and to kind of go to what Jay had said, right? Arna?
Hey guys, so I can tell you that last time I chased this issue in the TAC minutes, it was pretty disappointing because I ended up with a thread where there had been a discussion on the TAC meeting. Most people seem to believe that the TAC should at least be notified, but there was no final decision made. There was no quorum on that call, and this was never picked up again, as far as I can tell. And so I support the idea that, this should be brought up for clarification to the TAC. I do want to say, we got to what Mike was just saying, that there was also, as part of the discussions, by the way, I think, at least at some point, because this issue keeps popping up, so it's hard to know, in which group, in which call this came up. But I think there is a difference whether it's on Salsa Dev, for instance, or if it's on the OpenSSF main blog, right? And so you can imagine this, that not the same level of controls are necessarily necessary. But the other part I wanted to say, on Salsa Dev, we do distinguish between what is called guest post and what's just post from the group. This is clearly labeled. This is something I contributed a PR earlier to make this even clearer than it was. And if you go to Salsa Dev and go to blog, you'll see, if you scroll through the list, it clearly says either by like Mark Lodato, blah, 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 or guest post by blah, blah, blah. And, my understanding is the steering committee for Salsa has to approve those posts anyway. And then I don't know that we've always been so careful at being completely, making sure that everybody knows there's this blog post being worked on. And if this is where it's being discussed, drafted, if you want to have a say in it, just pay attention there. Probably we can always do better on that, but.
So Isaac, thoughts? Is this kind of the discussion you were?
Yeah, I think so. This gives me a jumping off point, actually. So maybe I'll put together just a quick one pager to frame this discussion and what we're talking about and where we have gaps. I don't mind drafting that up and sharing it and getting feedback. But I think this has been a great kickoff discussion. It's raised an area which I hadn't even considered, which is about like this whole thing about guest posts and who's authorized to speak in the voice of whom, and how does that vary across the various properties that we all touch and so on. And so I'll include that as well. And I'll draft up just some thoughts on, what types of principles might guide us to where content should go with respect to blogs or documentation. That's the question I came in with, but now I've got more threads to pull on. I'm happy to do that, and I'll start off with a one pager.
Thanks, Isaac. Does anybody else have other agenda items before we kind of go through the blogs? No. Okay, blogs it is. Mike, you have this.
Yep.
Breath and depth salsa.
Yeah, so that's been getting some feedback on it from folks like Trishank, Sam, and Mr. Pepper, and Tim. And anybody else feel free to add stuff in there. I don't know when we want that sort of thing to go out. once again, I'm like, I said, hey, I wrote my draft. If folks think it needs to be expanded on or any big ticket items, feel free to put it in there. If folks just want to talk about, let's say, like, any sort of things that they feel like is just needs rewording or whatever, feel free to add that as well. And whenever I guess there is a consensus, maybe we want to say next week, or maybe we want to say even a couple of days. Once that thing is sort of done, I can open up I can convert it to Markdown and open up a PR to the Salsa blog for that.
When do you want to target the review for the draft the way it is right now versus the GitHub PR?
So I mean, that's up to us as the group to decide. Like, I don't want to, it doesn't matter to me, honestly. Like, it could be end of day today, it could be end of week, it could be whatever. Whenever folks in this group feel like it's ready to, let's say, be opened up as a PR. I just wanted to make sure that, given that I don't want to, it's not the easy, like a Google Doc is a little bit easier for this sort of review, like that initial, like, actually, I think the way you've structured the first half is just wrong is a little bit easier to kind of talk through on something like a Google Doc compared to Markdown and GitHub, at least in my opinion. And then I know that, once we get to the actual PR where it's in Markdown, it's a little bit easier to, talk about formatting or just like, hey, maybe this word choice doesn't seem right. I think that's a little bit easier to do there.
Okay. Folks have that. And I know that this also is going to coincide with this build versus source, which I just started this morning. And I shared it in the channel, but I know Chris has not taken a look yet, because again, I just happen to have time and I'm like, okay, I just start because I do reference this blog that you have in here. Where is it? I reference a blog by you because there's a inception of salsa tracks as an example. So I definitely want help eyes on this one, because it's very much not done. It just got started. So if folks want to contribute to this one, community to contribute review, that would be extremely helpful, right? I'm not a wordsmith. I have lots of ideas and opinions, but it's hard for me to convey that sometimes on paper. So that's one thing. And then I forget, is Emmy on? Anyone from? No, Emmy's not on. There was this other one, or this one. This is a lower. What about the what's new? Does anybody know who has the pen on the tweaks based off community feedback? And if they will be updating it? Anybody know? No. Okay, so maybe that's an action item to follow up with those folks, just to make sure that they don't forget about that.
One thing I
know-
wonder, Melba, one thing I wonder though is that the specification now has a section on what's new. So I wonder if that's not enough, or if, how much we're going to be able to add in a blog post. It's still being worked on, but this is something that was added. There's a page, and if you look at the RC1, there's almost nothing, but if you look at the draft, there is more, and I think there may be even more coming up.
So do you, and sorry, I have a habit of looking away when I'm thinking and make sure nobody's hands up. Do you think, because there is a blog on the what's new for the release candidate, does anybody think it would be advantageous to release a blog to say, hey, thanks for the feedback from the community. As a result, these were the things that we changed, and these are the things that we kept, right, or removed, right? Something like that, so that it shows progress based off of the previous blog. Do you think that would be helpful for the community?
I think that that would be useful. My understanding is there's going to be an RC2 coming out in the next couple of weeks. And I think alongside that RC2, it would be useful to summarize what changes have been made to the release candidates to make it go from RC to RC2. Summarize the feedback that led to those changes. And so I think in that update blog post that accompanies RC2, and I think the target is I wasn't actually in the meeting, the spec meeting yesterday, so this is secondhand info, but I think it's like in a couple of weeks' time.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd like to see like maybe some type of coordination, right? Remember, we didn't put out the initial blog.
Correct.
And so and since there's an RC2 blog, I mean, I'm assuming we're not putting that out either. So for us to start thanking people for their feedback and contributions when we're not in sight of the ask. Right?
Who's the we, Jay? Is the we this group here, the people here on this call?
Right. Well, this SIG is not right. The SIG didn't put out the original blog, and the SIG is probably not going to be putting out RC2. So if this SIG is talking about now writing a feedback blog to say thank you for your contributions, well, we don't even know what, I mean, aside from better coordination between those that are putting out that blog and us, and having a consensus on what's the ask, what are we thanking people for exactly? Right.
I mean, I think that you're pointing to one question we don't yet have an answer, or I've not seen an answer to, is like the salsa specification team put out the previous release candidate blog post, and as far as I know, didn't consult with this team here and this SIG here. Was that okay? Do we have an opinion on that? I think I heard that the opinion was that was a bit iffy, and folks in this group felt it would have been better to be consulted. In which case, do the folks in the other groups know that? And do they know what the process is to gather input from this team? Like, I just feel like, yes, you're pointing to a lack of coordination, but it's beyond just this RC stuff. It's like, if the salsa specification people want to put out a blog post, is the process for that they have to involve the TAC and they have to involve this working group, or can they do it, like there's just general governance ambiguity?
I'll tell you, by design, and I'm sorry, Melba, I'm sorry. And then Melba's gonna jump in and iron out everything that I'm about to say. By design, this particular SIG was established to be that arm, right? And by the way, I'm not saying right or wrong here. What I'm saying is, man, it would have been nice to know. It would have been nice to know that was even happening before it happened. I shrugged my shoulders. But I will say that the whole intent was for us to be that support for salsa as a whole. That's my jumping on it. But go ahead, Melvin.
Yeah, I can't raise my hand, so I tried to show my hand raised. So for Isaac and for some folks that may not have been in that meeting, there was a conversation about this with a writer. Dang, that didn't copy and paste properly. A writer of that blog. It was Chris K. And it was documented in the notes that, there was some disappointment in us not being involved because we were still at the time the salsa positioning SIG, right? But we didn't have a decision on what should that coordination look like, because we don't want to hold up every blog, right? But there are certain things, hi Jennifer, there are certain things that we would want to coordinate on. Something as big as the release, we probably would. And don't quite know how to navigate that, right? Where do you draw that fine line of letting them do their thing but maybe something as big as this, we should be involved in some way, because that is the intent of this SIG, right? Is to help with those communications, make sure it's not, I don't know if myopic is the right word, but I know Jay's mentioned like, well, what about the other legs of SCI, S2C2F and Fresca? How does that fit in with the blog? Can we put in something in there to kind of give the audience more than just what they're given in this little bubble? So yeah, that was the comment I wanted to say, that they are aware. I don't know if Chris went back and said something to the other writers, but they are aware, and we copied the notes on, or we have the notes on when we voiced that concern about that particular blog.
Got it. Okay. So I think, I mean, based on that, I mean, that seems totally valid. And I agree with you that this thing here is in a position to provide broader context around blog posts, which may be narrowly focused in one particular area and may benefit from kind of positioning within that broader context. I think what the gap that we have is documentation of the process, as far as I'm concerned, because Chris didn't know, and I'm not sure if the folks in the Salsa tooling group know, and they're also out there blogging about support for Salsa in this build system and that build system, or verification or whatever. And so I think that we have a process documentation gap, and we need to have someone volunteer to step into that gap.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and I think there's also going to be obviously like, so there's stuff that shows up on the Salsa blog that I think is going to be one thing, but there's also stuff like, I think, you know, which we can't necessarily control outside of our community, but, you know, some of it is just we might want to, or rather we don't, like, I guess the thing is, like, nothing is preventing anybody from talking about any of this on their own blog. Like, there might be stuff where, hey, you know, if folks preempt, let's say, something that we plan to announce or we plan to do, you know, that's just sort of, you know, bad practice. But I think, yeah, generally we also, you know, folks are going to be talking about all sorts of stuff on whatever blog they want there as well.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead,
I'm
Jen.
curious if we have an idea of the story we want to tell as that broader, more cohesive context, right? Like, I think the idea of allowing every individual group to have autonomy over what they describe is important, because like we talked about previously, people will work around whatever process gets put in place if there's something they want to say, or they'll say it as individuals, as Michael stated, like on their own blog. So I think maybe like for this group, as it gets going and considers that broader context, like, what is the story we want to tell about how all these different pieces come together to solve the broader supply chain integrity, and that would better help us define how involved we need to be with the sub-projects, and exert contributions, maybe rather than influence or control over what they're saying. And I don't know if that's captured anywhere, or if that's upcoming work that folks are thinking about.
Yeah, so we have talked about that, which is another reason why it was elevated, right? To give a voice, have better collaboration across the SIGs underneath Supply Chain Integrity Working Group, because there was none, right? It was like, okay, just even within Salsa, like the tooling versus spec, right? Like versus, you know, positioning, right? There was a gap in communication at times. And so we identified that and said, okay, we need to better collaborate, right? If you want comms or something, come to us and we'll help, right? You don't have to do it on your own. We can help review. And they have come to us to review some drafts. And sometimes I've gotten a blog directly from some random person because the specification group told them to come to me. And like, I'm like, I'm not an authority, but I'll help, you know, review whatever is there, right? And for SCI, that's what we want to do, not just across, you know, just Salsa, but across Fresca, Salsa, and S2C2F. And so we do have to form that vision which we'll have to do so very, very quickly, because we have a talk on it in OpenSSF or OpenSSNA, and maybe OpenSSF Day, we're hoping. So that is absolutely warranted, and we do want to have that. I think it's the not being the red tape. We don't want red tape. We want to help, right? And again, we very much try to reach out to help as much as we can, and it's disheartening, right? When they don't, for something as big as this, reach out to us, because that's what we're here for. It was, yeah. So anyways, I get off my soapbox. Did that help address some of that, John? Or did I just kind of ramble and go off on a different topic?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think maybe there's I still have a little bit of a question of like, where are we going, and what do we want to do next, and how do we tackle that work? And like in supporting everything, and maybe it's not necessarily this group that's responsible for that as much as the like supply chain integrity working group, like at a higher level. And I don't know how, I haven't joined or contributed to that group at all. So
Yeah, we do have a CI. Is it this one? I think it's this. Yes. So this is the new mission vision that Isaac helped draft up, and I can put that in the chat on where we want to go in 2023 and potentially beyond. So he did draft this up early this year when we brought these concerns of, hey, the working or the sub projects are not talking to each other, right? They're each doing great things, but they're not aligned. And how is that providing value to the industry, right? We want a cohesive story. We want to be able to say, use all of these things to help your supply chain integrity. And we couldn't, because nobody was talking to each other, right? Like, Mike is very much involved in all the different projects, but not everybody is, right? So we can't have just, the one person hopping around. We need collectively a group to make sure that we are communicating and we are trying to make sure everyone's aligned as best as we can. So I'll put this in the notes as well.
this doc is great. This is exactly what I was thinking. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then where are we going? And then there's also a salsa roadmap that we helped start drafting for, this was when we were still the salsa positioning. We still have some work to do to kind of clean it up, but for the most part, it was well received. And we just need to finalize it. 2mm, too many me. If you can help, myself with that, that'd be fantastic. I'd have all sorts of time to do this stuff. Any other topics on this / coordination / the governance? I know Jennifer Bly is here, so she kind of came in at the tail end.
Yeah, I apologize. I missed some things.
No worries, no worries. No need to apologize. Yeah, we had some question around the governance of blogs, right? There doesn't seem to be an official decision by the TAC on when they should be consulted / when they should review versus not. If it's not on the OpenSSF blog versus, salsa.dev, do releases always have to go through TAC? Do working groups have to go through TAC for the right? So there's things like that we're not quite sure of, and maybe that's something you can give color.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely still some ambiguity, and we should find where those are and clarify those. I do want to share with you of the OpenSSF content policy. I think that might be helpful.
Okay.
Let me drop it in the chat here. If you scroll down to the bottom, there is a little bit about project websites and social media. So that hints on it a little bit, but I think you've identified a few additional areas that we just don't have clarity on quite yet.
Okay. Okay, so this is good. We'll have to, let me put that in the notes. Yeah, because there's definitely a bunch of questions that we have, and like when do we consult, when we don't? Like
absolutely.
salsa.
I think we need
Salsa,
clarity on that. I would say for any release, for sure, the TAC. So what we do for the OpenSSF blog overall is anything that's of a sort of a technical statement on behalf of the organization. We run all of those things by the TAC. And so in a case like the Salsa 1.0, I think for sure run it by the TAC. I also want to run that one by the governing board, the marketing committee, have everyone on board. So for major items like that. But then for some of these more detailed specific pieces that might be just going on salsa.dev, I think there's where we could have additional clarity.
go ahead, Isaac. No,
Yeah,
I
I think Jennifer had literally her last sentence covered what I was about to ask, which is looking at the guidelines you have is focused on OpenSSF properties. And so like my example is, let's say a part of, a subgroup of Salsa wants to do a short blog post on salsa.dev about, I don't know, a new technique for generating salsa provenance, fairly niche, concerned only really with salsa, very niche audience. Like the process for getting that blog out, I think we were discussing earlier, is unclear. Like it's unclear, or at least it hasn't been published or documented. Should the SCI team be involved in that? We don't know. Should the TAC be involved in that? We don't know. Should Jennifer Bly be involved in that? We don't know. And I think we need clarity on all of the above, basically. And so I think we identified a gap around things on salsa.dev specifically. With OpenSSF, I have much greater clarity, and Jennifer, I'd certainly include you on anything that I was intending to put on OpenSSF's owned and operated properties. But for salsa.dev, it's a little bit blurrier, and I think that we need to crisp that up for folks wanting to get content out.
Yeah. Go ahead, you can respond, and then before you, Mike, I've been trying. Go ahead, Jennifer.
So I was just going to say that I think the way, if we look at how it works with, let's say, SigStore, for example. So SigStore has their own process that they've developed that works specifically for them. And then the coordination with OpenSSF, I'll come in and, work together on things that might be like a cross collaboration type of thing. So I think maybe starting with the community and specifically developing a process that works for Salsa, for SCI overall. Yeah.
So yeah, I had a question on, like the release as an example. We are going to have subsequent material to explain more about 1.0, right? And so does that have to go to the TAC to be reviewed? It's not going to go on OpenSSF, it's going to go on salsa.dev, but it's part of a release, and justifying why we made the decisions we made and trying to bring clarity to some of the maybe new requirements, etc. So does that have to go to the TAC because it's associated to a release?
I think we should ask them that question. Do they want to be looking at very specific information? I'm cognizant that they are already very busy and are reviewing a lot of things already. So I think that should be offered. Yeah.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, and I think related to that, I think one of the things we really want to make sure is a bit clearer is so for example, the one area that I know is a point of contention is under process, under what you linked, notify OpenSSF on major updates, announcements, and new content. What constitutes as major has been a huge topic of debate with some folks assuming almost anything is a major announcement that needs to be addressed through sort of the be sent to the TAC, and some folks are like, anything outside of here is some massive new release needs to be it can be its own thing, and I think that sort of thing is something that we want to make sure is clear And I know based on previous discussions within the TAC, and I think it was before you had joined, but Arno has also mentioned that he was exploring exactly what counts as major is very much a sensitive topic right now. But if we can and I think the folks here on this call are more than willing to provide their input on that to the TAC if interested, because I know one of the things we want to have that nice balance between, hey, yeah, this is big enough where OpenSSF should be definitely taking the lead and making sure that, we're not announcing something that goes against anything from the OpenSSF point of view, anything that, from the goals of the OpenSSF or whatever, and make sure that it's also, we can be super effective while also making sure that if somebody is posting some random thoughts about, hey, here is how I've done such and such with salsa, and it's a relatively innocuous thing, we also don't want that to now have to go to the TAC and go through approval as well.
Right, Jennifer?
I was just going to say, yes, I agree. I think having clarity and specific guardrails in place will then make it very clear about, this does, this doesn't, and kind of help facilitate moving through the process.
Okay.
So given the way the TAC has been reluctant to be kind of over controlling, I would put it that way, I think, aiming for notification is probably kind of a good target. I think the TAC doesn't mind to be notified when things are going to happen. And it gives people the opportunity to review if they care, but it doesn't put them, on the critical path. Like now they have to approve, otherwise things get stopped.
Where would would we want to put that in the TAC? Like the Slack channel TAC as an example?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, copy.
And back to Mike's point, I mean, what's major, what's not. I'm afraid this will always be a little bit contentious anyway. And it's some of it, there's only so much you can, specify so accurately that it's going to be a clear cut every single time. Unless you make it a binary, you're doing nothing, then you don't need anything, or you're doing something, then you need, to do everything. If you try to have different categories or use cases, you're going to have always the problem of edge cases where it's well, we thought it was that way, but hopefully, we have enough communication and then collaboration, goodwill that we can sort it out as a community.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think to kind of go back to some of Isaac's things is I think it would be totally at least in my opinion, if we had, we wrote up our guidelines, sent it over to the TAC and said, hey, here's our guidelines for what we consider major or minor. Does this seem reasonable? And if so, and obviously there's always going to be edge cases and we're just going to go and say, oops, that should not have gone out. We recognize it. Or, oh yeah, we went to you with something that was a little bit on the edge and you said it's actually not that big of a deal. So, oops, sorry. I think that's totally fine. I just think that the, what we have run into multiple times has been this back and forth about, oh, you merged this thing and deployed it without telling anybody. And we're like, oh, we didn't think we had to tell you on this thing because it wasn't major. And they're like, well, I think it's major. And it's like, oh, okay. so maybe if we have those guidelines clearer, it'll help.
Yeah. So I know, Isaac, you said that you were going to put together one pager, but I think we also need something about the coordination between Salsa, S2C2F, Fresca when it comes to comms with the positioning group. I just don't know what that looks like. So I'm not sure if anyone has thoughts, ideas, if they'd like to help draft that up. Because obviously we've had one instance, at least one instance that we weren't consulted, but we probably should have been, right? Not necessarily the gatekeepers, but So I'm not sure who's wanting or willing to help start drafting that up. Am I
I'm
gonna have
willing
to
to put
do
my hands on it.
any money move? Say that again?
I'm willing to put my hands on it.
Okay,
I think as a group, I mean, well, I'm willing to put my hands on it. I think, and in addition to that, will be a question of when is it appropriate to include honorable mention of all three, and when is it not? I mean, one of the when I proposed that in that blog post, one of the replies came back, well, that that shouldn't be mentioned here. That could be mentioned in a subsequent blog post. Well, what constitutes that subsequent blog post? When is it right to reference all three, and how the complementary nature of all three against what's currently be presented in that blog, right? What I mean, I know that's a lot. I just said a lot right there.
yes.
I mean, I think it begs to have a discussion though when it comes to when it comes to those blogs and the coordinated effort and how we talk about all three, the who, what, where, when, why of that may also need to be scoped out a bit.
Okay. Yeah, you can start the draft, right? More than willing to help as well. Because I do think there needs to be clarity. And I know even the whole guest post versus community, I remember adding clarity to the governance rules of Salsa to make sure that if it is a community, it has consensus from the community. It's not just one individual, right? So it needs more approvals versus guest post. And so a lot of the stuff that we write together as a community, that's a community post. But I've seen that being flagged as a guest post, not a community post, even though there's like 6 or 7 of us writing it. So there's, I think there's even ambiguity there, right? That we could kind of tighten up.
And just for the purposes of the notes, so that I'm not crossing over into what Isaac's writing, if you could please put down exactly what I'm supposed to be writing, just so I'm not crossing over into Isaac's.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Isaac's is more about what is a blog versus documentation, right,
Yep.
Isaac?
Yep.
I think.
I mean, I was gonna touch on the other side too, but I think actually having 2 one-pagers, me doing one and Jay doing another, is a great outcome. It will help with clarity.
Yeah, and then this one is when should you? Maybe there's 3 one-pagers. Guest versus community is another one. When should you?
It feels like Jay's is perhaps a guide to writing blogs on behalf of the SCI working group, and that would cover maybe a reference to my doc, should it be a blog in the first place, but then also here's the process, here's the guidelines, here's the kind of stuff you should bear in mind when doing things, here's what you should aim to reference when you're doing it, here's when to bring in Jennifer and when not to bring in Jennifer, and so on. And so I feel like what we need from Jay is an overall kind of end-to-end, aha, so you want to write a blog post? I have the 2-pager for you. Here it is.
So the way I heard that was as the working group. Sorry.
Just so you know, Jennifer, it's going to say when in doubt, consult Jennifer.
I'm cool with that.
So can I get clarification, Isaac? Because you said SCI working group, but this is more than just the SCI working group. It's also about the sub-projects or SIGs.
So I would say if we target, like, our audience is any subgroup within SCI, and if we end up loving this and think this is great, we're going to go export it and collaborate with the best practices working group or the memory safety working group or whatever and see, hey, do you have a guide to blogs? Because we just wrote one. Would you like to adopt this too? And we could spread it out from there. But I think starting with the SCI working group, getting it locked in for Salta, Fresca, S2C2F, you know, anything else we may add, SCI as a whole. Let's get that together and then see if there's opportunity to make this a standard across OpenSSF.
Okay. Sounds
And
good.
maybe, Jay, I mean, I know you're in other OpenSSF forum, maybe a reasonable starting point for this document is checking in with the other working groups. Do you all already have one and we're just late to the game here? Because if the best
Oh, yeah.
practices working group already has a guide to how to write blog posts and here's the stuff and how to do it and who approves, then maybe we could just look at adopting that.
Yeah, Isaac, you are already in my head. Since
I'm going to get out of your head now, Jay. Stepping back.
since the idea is to expand this out further, I will begin and then collapse in. We will start outward.
Sweet.
Work our way in.
Okay, well, thanks folks for joining. I know we're at time. Another great meeting. Appreciate the participation, the collaboration, and I'm hoping
Thank
we
you
can
so
get
much,
some of
Robin.
these blogs out and help 1.0 be awesome. Anyway, okay,
Thanks
bye
all.
everyone.